Hi there, so today we're looking at lesson 9.3 Coordinates and Midpoints. So the objectives for this lesson: to generate and plot coordinates from a rule, to solve problems and spot patterns in coordinates, and to find the midpoint of a line segment. Check our prior knowledge before we start then. We need to be able to find the difference between two numbers. Remember, to find the difference, it means we're subtracting one number from another. We need to be able to half a number. So halving a number is dividing it by 2. And we should be able to plot and read coordinates in 4 quadrants, remembering that we read our x coordinate before our y. So we often use the phrase along the corridor and up or down the stairs. Things you'll need to complete this lesson: then you need your maths book or some paper to write on, a pen or a pencil to write with, and you may wish to have your calculator to help with any of the calculations as we go along. Okay, so we're going to start then with generating coordinates. So one way of generating or creating a set of coordinates is to use a function machine. So this is a function machine. We've got our input, so that's the value we're putting into the machine, our function, what we're going to do to that input, and then our output, so the value after it's gone through the machine. Now we've got our input values x and we've got our output values of y. And we've used x and y because we're going to be looking at our coordinates on our x and y axes. So if we put the number 1 into the machine, we take 1, we times it by 8, our output would be 8. If I put 2 into the machine and times it by 8, 2 times 8 means my output is 16. Then we do the same for 3. 3 times 8 would be 24, and 4 times 8 would be 32. So this is quite a simple function machine. It just has one rule in the middle. You may come across some with more than one thing that we need to do. But we've got our input. We apply the function to our input to get our output. Now, another way of showing this information would be to put it into a table. So we've got our x values here, and we're going to put our outputs, our y values here. So we've got the first one, we've input 1, we got 8 as an output. If we input 2, our output of y is 16. Then we had 24 and 32. If I were to input 5 into the same machine, 5 times 8, I would get 40. So you'll also see these results in a table. Now, once we've got these results, we're using our x and y, and we can use those as our coordinates. So our first pair of coordinates, our x and y together, is 1 and 8. So remember, the first value is always the x, followed by the y, and they must have brackets around them to show that it's a coordinate and not just two separate numbers. Our second pair of coordinates then here are 2 and 16, so x then y, so 2 and 16, then 3 and 24, 4 and 32, and 5 and 40. So we can get these values either from our function machine or from our table, and these become the coordinates that we want to plot. So once we've got our coordinates, we can plot them onto our graph. So we've got our x-axis is always our horizontal axis, and our y-axis is always our vertical axis. Now I can see the horizontal axis here is going up in steps of 1. Remember, whatever it starts going in, it must continue. So it's always going in steps of 1 every 5 squares. Our y-axis is going in steps of 10 every 5 squares. So again, they don't have to be identical, but once you start counting, we have to continue in the same group. Now we can plot those onto the graph then. So we're going to start with our first point, which is 1 and 8. So that's along the corridor. X is 1 and y is 8. Now remember, 10 is 5 squares, so each individual square, 10 divided by 5 is 2, so each individual square is worth 2. We want to go up 8, so that means we go up 4 small squares. So there we go, we've gone along 1 and up 8. Our next one is 2 and 16, so we go along 2 and up 16. So again, making sure we counted really carefully, going up in 2s. Then 3 and 24, 4 and 32, and 5 and 40. So we plot all of our points, and finally, and really importantly, we draw a line through them. Now for these particular ones, we are always going to have a straight line. So if when you draw your graph, your points don't line up in a perfectly straight line, then something has gone wrong and need to go back and check those coordinates again. Make sure you're happy with all that information before you move on to the next slide. Okay, so now it's your turn then. So you've been given a function machine here. We're told our inputs, so we're going to put in the values of x. Our function is +4, and we're going to write down our outputs, our values of y. Once you have those, you can turn them into coordinates, remembering by putting the x value and then the y value, so our x, then our y, with a comma and with brackets. You then need to draw the graph axes into your book, so you can copy this one here, plot the coordinates onto the grid and draw the line through the points, so just as I did on the previous slide. Pause the video, have a go at that in your book now. Okay, so if we put -2 into the machine, -2 + 4 will give us 2. So our coordinates for that first point are -2, 2. If I put 0 in and add 4, I get an output of 4. So my coordinates are 0 and 4. And finally, if we put in 2 and we add 4, we get 6. So the coordinates are 2 and 6. Now we've got our points, we're going to plot those onto our axis. So remember the x one first, the horizontal, then the vertical. So horizontally across to -2 along the corridor, up the stairs to 2. Then 0 and 4. So remember that means no horizontal movement. So we're starting at 0 in our left and right, but we go up to 4. And our next one across to +2, +2 there, and up to 6. And again, we draw a line through. So again, it should be one perfectly straight line through all of the points on there. Make sure you're happy with that and you've marked your work before you move on. Okay, we're now going to start to have a look then at the midpoint of a line. So the midpoint of a line section is the point exactly in the middle. Okay, so we call it a line segment because it starts and stops between 2 points. It doesn't just carry on forever, otherwise we wouldn't be able to find the middle of it. So when finding the middle then, so our example is we're asked to find the midpoint of A, which is at 1, 4. So we've been given coordinates for A, and B, which is at 5, 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to draw them onto my axis to help me. So I'm going to draw A at 1, 4. So 1 along and 4 up, and B at 5, 4, 5 along and 4 up. So there we've got our points A and B. Now we want to find the midpoint of those 2 points, so we're going to draw a line between them. Our next step then is to find the middle. So we're looking at our line. I can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So the middle must be 2 squares along. So I'm going to put a little mark in the middle. I'm going to call that C. And that's my midpoint. So the coordinates of this point here are 3, then 4. Remember x, then y. So 3, 4. And making sure we've got our brackets so we know it's a coordinate. All right, so we're plotting our points, drawing a line. We're finding the middle of that line, putting our little mark, and writing down the coordinates of that middle point. Okay, so we've got some here for you to have a go at. Now, let's talk through the first one together first of all. So we've asked for line segment CD. So we're going to find the one that's called CD. So that's this one here, going from C to D. The beginning point is at C, so the beginning point is always the first letter. So that's at 5 along, 6 up, so that's here, 5, 6. The end point is at D, so that's 5, 4. So we've put in our end point, and now we find our midpoint. So we look at our line, we can see there are 2 squares, so halfway is here, 1 square in between. So our midpoint there is at 5, 5, so halfway between. So you need to copy the table into your book, write down the beginning, remember that's the first letter, and the end point, the coordinates of the last letter, and then see if you can find the coordinate of the midpoint. Pause the video, have a go now. All right, so line EF then, so our start point then is at E, so that's along the corridor -1 down to -1, so -1, -1. F is at 3, -1. And our midpoint, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 squares, so we need to go 2 squares along, so that's here, so that's at 1, -1. G and H, that's this line here, so let's start at G, and we've got 1 across and 4 up. H is at 5 across and 0 up and down. And the middle, so now we've got diagonals, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 diagonals, half of 4 is 2, so I'm going 1, 2 diagonals, so that puts me here, so that's 3 across and 2 up, so 3 for X and 2 for Y. Our last one then, so I is here, so that's at -1, 5. J is at -3, 1. And again, it's a diagonal, so we need to find the middle. So hopefully we can see the middle is just here. So this was a bit trickier to find the middle. And that's at -2, 3. So that was a little bit more challenging at the end because we don't have exactly whole squares to count. Check your answers, make sure you are happy. All right, so as we saw with that last one, if the line doesn't have nice equal amount of squares between, it's a bit more difficult to find the middle. So we need a different way of working it out. So for instance, this one here. So I've been told this point's at 8, 3 and this one's at 10, 6. I haven't been given the rest of the grid. And I can see, you know, it's quite tricky for me to just visually see where the middle is. I know the middle's around here somewhere, but you know, what's this number here? How am I going to find out what coordinate that is? I don't even have a grid to count from. So our method for doing this then, to find the midpoint of the x coordinate, we add the two x coordinates together and divide by 2. So remember, the x coordinates are the first numbers. So our x coordinates are 8 and 10. So we do 8 plus 10, which is 18, and then divide it by 2, finding halfway, which gives us 9. So the midpoint for x is 9. We're now going to do the same for y. So our y coordinates, look, are 3 and 6. So we add them together. 3 plus 6 is 9, and divide by 2. Again, we want the midpoint. Middle is halfway, so that's why we're dividing by 2. And that gives us 4.5. So we put those together. This is our x coordinate, and this is our y coordinate. And we get the midpoint is at 9, 4.5. So that's about here. Okay, so if this square is under 8, this is 9, this is 10. So we're at 9 this way. And going up, this is 3, 4, 5, 6, and we can see we're halfway through. So we don't actually need the full grid. We don't even need the diagram. We should just be able to use the coordinates and be able to find the midpoint using this method. So it's a really good method because we don't need any diagrams at all. Make sure you're happy with that method before you move on. So remember, add the x coordinates and divide by 2 for the middle of x. Add the y coordinates, divide by 2 for the midpoint of y, and then we put those together to find the midpoint of the line. All right then, so please use the new method to have a go with these. You can check your answers by visually looking at the grid, but use the method to help you find the midpoint. Pause the video and have a go now. Okay, so for number 1 then, for the x coordinate, we're going to add the x coordinates together, which is 1 plus 1, which is 2 divided by 2 gives us 1. For the y coordinate, we're going to add the y, so 4 plus 0 is 4. We'll divide that by 2, and that gives us 2. So the midpoint is at 1, 2. For number 2 then, add the x's. 1 plus 5 is 6. We divide it by 2, gives us 3. For the y's, 0 plus 0 is 0, and 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So our midpoint is at 3, 0. For number 3, 3 plus 5 is 8, divided by 2 is 4 for x. Now I'm going to be a little bit careful. Look, we've got minus 2 plus 2. Well, if I do minus 2 plus 2, I get 0, and 0 divided by 2 is 0. So we get 4, 0. And the last one, we've got 1 plus 3 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. And we get 4 plus minus 2. So from plus minus is the same as minus. So 4 take away 2 is 2. And half of 2 is 1. So our coordinates are 2, 1. So just be careful if you are dealing with some negative numbers. Remember your rules for negative numbers. Plus and minus together is the same as a minus. Make sure you're happy with those before you move on. Okay, finally then we're on to our challenge question today. So again, you have a choice as always. You can try and work through the challenge yourself. If you wish to do that, then pause the video and have a go now. Or you can continue and work through it with me. All right, so our challenge then, a right-angled triangle. So that tells us something about the triangle. It tells me it's got a 90-degree corner if it says it's right-angled. Has a vertical side of 4 units with a midpoint at -2, 1, and a horizontal side of 4 units with a midpoint at 0, -1. Find the midpoint of the third side of the triangle. Okay then, so for our vertical side then, we know the midpoint was at -2, 1, and we know it's 4 units long. Well, if it's 4 units long and that's the middle, we need to have 2 for our vertical side up and 2 down. So we need to take 2 from our vertical. Now remember, the vertical is the y. So this is our vertical number. This is our y number. So I need to take 2 away. So I get -2, -1. And I need to add 2. So I get -2 and 3. Okay, so that's the vertical side then. So we now know where the start, the end, and the middle are. Okay, now we need to do the same for the horizontal. So our horizontal, remember, our horizontal side has 4 units with a midpoint of 0, -1. So there we are, 0, -1. Now our horizontal value is the x value here. So again, if it's 4 units long and that's the middle, half of 4 is 2, so we need 2 either side. So we're going to start by subtracting 2 from x. We get -2, -1, and then we're going to add 2 to x, which gives us 2, -1. So now we know our start points and our end points. Okay, now we can see that the start points are the same. So it must be between the 2 end points that we need to find the middle of. So we're going to use our rule as we did before. We're going to add our x coordinates together. So -2 plus 2, which is 0, divided by 2 is 0. And our y coordinates, so 3 plus -1, so that's 3 take away 1 is 2, divided by 2, which is 1. So our midpoint of our third line is 0, 1. Now that's quite a challenge. So another way you might want to look at this is to draw a sketch. Often drawing a sketch makes things a little bit easier with maths. So if you thought that was quite tricky, then maybe a sketch will help. So I've drawn a grid here. So we've got our 4-quadrant axis. I've gone to 4 in both directions and -4. Okay, so my x is from -4 to 4 and my y is from -4 to 4 as well. So I would start by plotting on my midpoint there. So my first midpoint is at -2, 1. And again, we were told it was vertical 4 units. So if that's the middle, that means I need to go up 2 and down 2 with my line. There we are. Plot the other midpoint, 0, -1 is here. And again, it's 4 units. So I need 2 either side horizontally here. So I draw a line, 2 to one side and 2 to the other. There we go. We can then see where they join here. But we want to draw in the third side of our right-angled triangle. There it is there. And then we can find the midpoint. So again, we can either now use our diagram to show that our midpoint is here, or we can use the coordinates of the 2 points at each end of the line. And our midpoint is at 0, 1. Okay, so we can do these with calculations, but often it's actually easier to draw a small sketch of what you want to be able to find that. So a couple of different ways of solving these challenge type questions. All right, well, thank you for working through that lesson today. Next lesson, we are going to continue to look at straight line graphs, and we'll be looking at more complex functions.